Welcome back to my channel Conquer the Fear. If you are a Spring Boot developer and if you are struggling with understanding what is the difference between @value and configuration properties, then this video is for you. They seems to be very similar, but they when to use which one is going to offer the type safety, and which one is better for the complex groups. In this video I'm going to cover everything, so watch this video till the end and without skipping it. Now in this video we'll check what exactly the configuration properties is about, how it is going to be different from the value. So when you're dealing with binding the properties, these two annotation comes in picture in Spring Boot. Now configuration and value, these are the annotation which are used for injecting the externalized properties into your Java objects. So when you want your externalized properties to be available in your Java objects at the runtime, in that case you use this. Now let's discuss the first configuration. Now this is the annotation which is provided to bind your external properties. Let's say you are defined these properties in your application.properties or YML or in your environment, and you want to map it to the fields in your Java class, that too in a type safe manner, then this is the configuration annotation you should be using. Now when you're creating the POJO that you're going to represent a group of related properties, in that case we are going to use the configuration. Now let's look at the important advantages. Now when you want your it is going to, the very first thing is it is going to be the type safe binding. So when you're converting the property value to a correct data types, let's say your string, int, boolean, map, or any other custom object, then this is going to reduce your risk of throwing a class cast exception, because here it is going to improve your readability over here. Now, group properties. Now, when you want to bind your entire set of related properties into a single class, making your configuration much more organized and manageable, then these are for the complex application. So you use this particular grouped properties in that case. Now if you want a hierarchical structure or in the property, so this is going to support that particular nested properties, where you have that particular multi nested properties to be defined. Let's say you have app, then under that you have security, and then security has got 10 properties attributes. Let's say one of them is username, password, URL, etc. So in that case it is going to be supporting the complex, and it will be directly mapped with this particular configuration classes. Now relaxed binding. Now Spring Boot is going to provide you a feature with relaxed binding, which is going to allow that particular property in your configuration that can be defined in various combinations that can be mapped to that particular fields in the class. Now you can define database.url, you can define database URL, then you can define database underscore URL. Now this particular mapping will be still applicable to be mapped to that particular field which is mentioned in the POJO, that is database URL. So in that case it is going to give you some ease of binding that property instead of trying to tightly adhere to that particular naming convention. Now you can also do the validation. So you can do the JSR 303 beans validations with the help of the annotations which are provided. Now we have at the rate non-null, we have minimum, max, or some patterns. So you can validate on that particular bounded properties over there. Then comes the configuration metadata. Now you can generate the metadata from this at the rate configuration. So this can be used in your IDE to provide some auto configuration, or you want to do some documentation on your configuration properties. Now immutable property. So with respect to Java 17, that is records, you can create your immutable properties, and you can enhance this particular thread safety features and predictability over here. I hope you got the understanding of at the rate configuration properties. Now let's look at the at the rate value annotation. Now this is used for injecting the individual property into the directly into the fields or a constructor parameter or a method parameter in your Spring managed beans. Now this is going to use the Spring expression language, that is SpEL, to resolve that properties to the defined in that particular POJO. Now, what are the advantages? This is quite simple when it comes to injecting your single properties, so an isolated property. So when you're dealing with multiple properties and you want an individual things to be handled in certain way, you can use that. Now, this is going to support the SPL. So the power of SPL is going to be much more, having the complex expression to be included inside it. There are some mathematical operations and the access to the other beans can be provided in it. Now, this particular direct field parameters could be injected directly into that field, so making it very concise and a simple way to map it between the properties to the POJO objects. Now, there are some limitations when it comes to using the at the rate value. Now, this is not going to provide you the type savity which was provided in the at the rate configuration. Now, when you're trying to convert some values, it can happen that it might throw an exception if it is not matching. So in that case, you have to very carefully handle those. Then there is no grouping. So when you're trying to each property, whatever you're trying to inject has to be, this can be a little bit scattered. This can be less organized when it compared to the configuration which are related properties. So that is unmanageable. Then there is no relaxed binding feature as directly we have seen in the at the rate configuration. So you generally need to have the specific matching of that particular exact property name in the properties file. Then the limitation of validation, so it does not support the built-in validation which is provided with the at the rate configuration properties, but you need to do some additional custom logics to be done for additional support of that. Now let's look at the code samples. Now, if you have to go to this particular Spring Initializer website where you have to download this particular project. So you have to choose Maven, the latest version of the stable Spring Boot version, then artifacts and the group ID, and the version of Java and the jar version. And then if you see on the right side, I've defined those particular or selected those particular configuration dependencies. So one is Spring Boot configuration processor and another is validation. So once you have this particular dependencies added and downloaded the project, import that into your IntelliJ. Now, if you look at this particular, once you open this in the project in your IntelliJ or any of your favorite IDE, just look out for this particular parent property. Then you will see there is a validation and the processor which we have added. So these are the important for having this particular annotations work in your application. Now let's go to the application main class. Now if you see here, I have written one command liner where I am trying to load one bean. So this is our main application. Now under this, if you see, I have written one app class which I am trying to load it using the command liner at the start of this particular application, and I have written one display configuration method inside it. Now I'm going to tell you both the way where we can actually use at the rate configuration and at the rate value. So first let us look at the at the rate value. Now you see here at the rate app services, this is the service which I have defined over here. Now inside this, if you see, I have written annotated with at the rate value. Now if you see this particular message, greeting.message, you will see that it is defined in the application.properties over here. Now if you see here, this is defined over here. And similarly, we can actually define the properties of the server.properties, the default server port also here, and then it will be mapped to that. So in this way, you can define those particular properties and then you can display that particular configuration details inside it. Now I will open the config. There is one more class which I have written over here. Now that is with the help of the at the rate configuration annotation. Now if you see here, I have given a prefix over here. Then I've created the getter setter, these all fields. And then if you see along with this app name, I have name, version, then this one, and then you will have another class over here which is going to be mapped up. So this is going to be a feature. Now you see that is the class security over here. So that a static class is different. So now you see this is how the complex The data structure is about if you want to map certain properties in a very complex or a group of related properties, then this way you can define in the configuration. Now let us go to the application.yml. Now we already discussed that we can define this particular property in a hierarchical manner, and this will show you the relation between these two, so that if you have very complex configuration, then you can actually easily see that where it will be very in a modernized way, in a concise way, in a readable way. So if you see, look at the complexity. At the first level I have name, app, then the name at the second level, then at the third level I have a security, and then at the fourth level I have the enable. Similarly, I have this particular features, which is for that feature and feature a. So in this way you can define those particular complex properties defined over here. Now we already discussed that in this configuration properties. Now if you look at this, even though if you are not going to specify the exact name, let's say you define some other names, but the name, exact name should be there, but let's say the cases are different, you write version in a v capital or something like that, or something difference in that, then definitely it will be mapped. That is called relaxed binding. So in that case you will be able to load and map it to the exact property over there. Let's try to run this particular application and see how this particular properties are loaded. Now you see here, these are all the properties which are written in that particular configuration class. Now you see the app name is being shown here, the version, the security is equal to true, the scrolls, admins, etc. These are all the configuration which I have defined in this particular YML file. Now if you see here, these are all everything being loaded inside this particular properties class. So that's how powerful it is. And remember, if you wanted to do individual mapping and if there is less complexity, in that case you can go with the less, uh, that is at the rate value. And if your requirement is little bit complex, like the how we have done this for this, in that case you can use at the rate configuration. Now let's look at the other example. Let's say if I am trying to comment this out over here. Let's say I'm commenting out all this, or let's say if I'm only commenting out this one. Let's say I don't have all these annotations defined over here. Now if I try to run this particular application, now you see these properties are not able to find it, and the application is not started. So this, if you see, the binding of this particular property failed, and you see there is no property value and everything, so it has failed. So you have to update the configuration. That exactly the error it throws. Now let's look at the when to choose which one. So as I mentioned, when you have multiple related properties, you can have that particular configuration using at the rate configuration. And when you require that particular type say binding to be happening in a proper way, the type conversion, then in that case we use this at the rate configuration. Also you want to validate some configuration files, you want to do some hierarchical, define the properties in a hierarchical or in a nested format, then at the rate configuration is the right choice, because it looks more cleaner, much more organized to manage your configuration. Now if you when to choose at the rate value, if you are trying a single isolated properties to inject to that particular b, in that case you can use, and your uh, internal properties are not complex in nature, in that case we can use. Now if you have some complex scenarios like combination of properties and etc., or you're trying to have some performance calculations etc., or defining some beans, in that case we can make use of this special expression over a spring expression. If you want to inject some properties that is in the in the constructor parameter, in the method parameter directly, then by creating at the rate configuration would be little bit like a overkill. So you can make use of at the rate value as a simple way, and this is going to be a very quick and a direct way to access that particular property, and if you have less number of properties. I hope I was able to explain you the difference of property, when to use it, what exactly these properties annotations are, and how you can implement in your application code. If this video was helpful, please share it with the needy people. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thank you for watching.